Things that glow. The glowing is a spark. It's that signal sense of possibility and wonder. The glow is on the inside. The glow is magic. It takes no orders from anyone and needs no directives. Okay, now there's a big limitation because the words I was just speaking and reading, it's exactly the kind of thing that, a little bit like stuff taken from poetry, it's hard to know exactly what is meant sometimes. It's something that can be understood intellectually, but the words are only going to go so far. And for this particular kind of meaning and feeling, it's really about remembering. And that's because this is something that we all have a frame of reference for. This is something that is inextricably linked to childhood. Daydreaming, reading, and playing. These are main parts for most childhoods, whether active or whether you're doing something more solitary. Playing or reading, for example. From here, the concepts are going to get increasingly subtle. I encourage approaching this material with an open heart and a reflective mind. So for children, the general state is being, for our purposes here. Being does not require reason or justification. It just is. You know, a child doesn't need to ask questions most of the time, like, why am I? You know, what am I here for? Most of the time. When you were being, not that it would be a bad thing if they did, but that would be a very philosophical child. It can happen, but anyway, I'll continue. When you were being, you connect with the world in a relatively open way. Your links to society as this entity we call society, right? That's another big marker here. Those links aren't really formed yet. It doesn't really make sense in the child's consciousness state to think of society as the kind of behemoth situation that it becomes as we get older. Instead, during those years, it's quite natural to connect to something higher, which you could call God or whatever you want to choose. This is going back to all kinds of ancient wisdom about connections that you can make when you're younger, having an easier time connecting to the spirit world and to the divine world, really. And usually this whole process is not conscious, of course. There's also an organization or pattern to this, though, and this is where I think, you know, it gets a little tricky. So let's just start with thinking that near things close to us, are things we're familiar with. And the farther away something is, it's more distant, obviously, right? That's just kind of the contrast there. This is other things, I think, works best as a division into three. So you have a 1, 2, 3, like chalk drawn on the ground. Things closer to us are more clear. And as they get farther away, the materiality dissolves into almost an energetic ether. We can view this as things that are close, and things that are familiar, then things that are beyond, really just visually, the stuff actually around us. So some examples of this, you know, for children especially, stuff that would be very close to you or things you interact with all the time. Home, your family, perhaps your school, or even the sense of self could go there actually. And again, we're dealing with this, right? Then familiar would be your town around you, the parks that you go to from time to time, certain friends that you see, especially those that you don't see as often, or neighboring towns, neighboring places, places you go to sometimes that seem intermediate for you. And then beyond would be everything else. And visually speaking, it's often things like the clouds, maybe the horizon, the sea, the mountains, stuff that's far away, or human elements like places that seem almost like fantasies, a big city far away that you hear your parents talking about, but have never seen or barely glimpsed or something. So here, let's just say this kind of very fantastical, lovely view is the view from a bedroom window or something, right? This kind of a scene. And then we superimpose this image of the triangle. Now, of course, I hinted at this, but the triangle shape, like this, has been used by certain societies and groups, as we all know. It's very interesting that certain symbols and ideas that are very powerful have been used by the dark side or certain factions within dark groups. Things have been twisted, but I think in this context, this particular outline and this notion is very powerful in a good way to help us understand things, especially as a kind of help tool as we forget about this stuff, maybe a little bit older in life, later in life, and we need to try to remember this can be something that jolts you a little bit. At least, you know, see how it affects you, see what impression it gives you. And of course, again, to kind of bring the description from earlier forward here, we're talking about a situation in which, you know, it's not going to line up perfectly with this triangle on the screen like this, but essentially the idea is, kind of metaphorically, you're talking about stuff that's very close to and intimate, that you can just run outside, things that are very close by, and then things that are a little farther away. And then this stuff at the top, this smallest triangle at the top, is standing in for the whole notion of places, themes, worlds, kind of just as it's kind of captured in the artistic quality of these misty hills and mountains going far back into the distance. This idea of, you know, potential access to a beyond that's magical, that's incredible, but that's also unknown. It's a bit of the adventuring spirit too. The idea of accessing it kind of magically and mentally through looking at it, not being able to get there, but seeing just enough of it, just this hint of something to open up this whole real sense of possibility towards the future, towards life itself, or to God. And a similar theme, a similar concept here with this interesting graphic that we've seen of a light bulb, and then we superimpose this, and it's sort of similar, you know, the spark of an idea, the light of an idea coinciding with the sun, the setting sun, or rising sun, I suppose. Let's say it's the setting sun, and the horizon line, for example. This sense of possibility, what's down there at the end of that road, in a way where things kind of geometrically, almost mathematically click in a harmonious sense, rather than producing something bland or nothing at all, actually succeeding in producing this whole real sense and real feeling of possibility there in a very positive and transcendent light. Something, again, that tends to get much more difficult through the aging process. So what exactly do we access in this beyond stage? This is, as I've been describing, where the magic comes in. So to a mind and heart that is unburdened, or at least unconnected to most social structures, right? That's key, that this connection to society and to social structures isn't there yet in the same way that it most likely will be. So in that case, magic really exists. The notion of magic exists in a way that can be very difficult for our fully formed minds to remember. Even, and I think this is key too, could be controversial, even if they are spiritual. Magic, possibility, and potential, these things come in like sparks, like fairy dust, fireflies. You know, you could use any image to describe that. It's this sense of possibility really being everywhere. And it goes further too. In a state of feeling truly free and open, the magic of the distance can become total and not just an idea. In that even in something specific and local, we have the opportunity to reconfigure our view of everything. That's a really important step here. You're not talking about kind of absorbing a certain spark of magic, a certain sense of possibility in a microcosmic sense as sort of one compartment or pocket of your consciousness. We are actually talking about something where you feel the whole thing. It all fills up. And it's not like you feel 10% possibility and 90%, you know, a sense of the ordinary, but it really becomes the everything for you. And again, this is the kind of thing that may figure intellectually, it may make sense on a certain level, but that's not the same as the feeling memory. So this is something that I'm using to represent a sense of consciousness actually spreading out from the left side to the right side, up through these hot magentas and pinks, all the way up to with some violet and some blue, okay? And the idea being that the hottest part of the pink or magenta right in the bottom left is the sense of the consciousness source. And the farther you go right, these are kind of later, more mundane, more ordinary, and acceptable slants on your conscious energy. So what we're talking about here is we're talking about, as I was saying, the totality of the everything. You're talking about the very seed at the very beginning, at the very crux of your consciousness, not something that, another way to describe this is things that would be later on towards the right of this plume, as it were, into the blue section, for example, the stuff that's coming over there. Could be if you were to, be sitting on the beach, having reading a cool book, and you're kind of engaged in the book, but you're also basically going about your life, thinking about the things that you think about. What time is dinner? Did you take a shower? Whatever it is, the normal stuff that we think about. And so the experience can actually get to that level of immersion. So I think, I'm describing this because this is really key. And again, it's the kind of thing that words are sometimes not that good at getting this across. So I just want to stress that we are talking about something that goes all the way back to that seed. This is a transcendent state that allows for limitless senses of pure possibility, or God, as we follow the close and familiar all the way up to the unknown. In the earlier diagrams, sparks of light create a pathway open to us because we are funneled into a magic of joy. The spark becomes the pathway, or funnel, or tunnel. The younger state, on a consciousness level anyway, is naturally more harmonious, almost geometric, if you will. Its scope is smaller, but it is more free, a lot more free sometimes. Very simply put, it is free to dream, or does so naturally. Something clicks in this 1-2-3 ratio, as I'm describing it, where the waves of consciousness can go all the way back. There's a freshness that enables one to soar and take flight. So really we're talking about, that, as we'll see again, the 1-2-3, almost as if the 3 then cycles back to the 1 and becomes close and accessible. So there's a relation between this seed of consciousness, something all the way back that becomes your everything view, and this, the view of possibility, where this smallest triangle on top, that potential of the beyond, becomes something close and accessible, even though it's theoretically infinitely far away, the horizon line infinitely far away. The possibility becomes at once totally distant and totally accessible. Practically speaking, of course, not all childhoods are equal. There is an issue, here that helps to determine how this process happens and how long it lasts. The whole process of being able to connect with these more free, more simple, and more whole pictures of consciousness. And safety and security are really, really big here, perhaps unsurprisingly. The importance of this is great through many stages of life, obviously, beyond just when you're a child. The condition of early life is to depend on others to provide for us. We require material support of others, meaning parents usually, as well as emotional and spiritual. Positive parent-child relationships are formed through trust, and this support is delivered. What does this support as a child mean for our consciousness itself? I think it helps to snap us in place, is a way to think of it. As children, this support becomes a support on consciousness. We interpret this reality on some level as safe when we get that support. The support signals that it is actually safe for our hearts and minds. You could also look at it as our imaginations, actually, which are already naturally adventurous most of the time, to proceed like a creeping magic carpet. As we come in here, this life, we may look around thinking, what is this place on some level? I guess that would be a more philosophical child, right? Support helps to establish that this is a place where we can relax. Even if life has difficulty, which it will, we can interpret the life, consciousness-wise, as a world that is complete, whole, and transcendent, even if only some of the time or once in a while. That usually is enough, I think, because we get the sense that this is a place where we can experience the whole through the part. And then we get older. The paradigm for security, and with it the paradigm for consciousness, is transmuted over time, which is, happens very differently for everyone, different ages, different stages, different everything. This more energetic definition of this support falls away because we really start a second life. What support do we get now as adults? What ensures the balance in our consciousness? Do we get to feel the same magic, or has the story now changed? These are just a few of the questions that can arise. Somebody, a student or something in this transitional period, oftentimes a lot of stress is, accompanies these ages as you go from childhood to adulthood. And I think, again, that's something else related to this too. But one general truth in this world, which I think is really striking, is that this entire process, what I've been talking about here, this change really, as you get older, is overlooked. The change in consciousness to adulthood is rarely discussed. And when it is, answers are rarely given. And when they are given, they rarely have depth. This is really a problem that everyone on Earth faces, yet few even know how to speak about it. The whole thing is marooned to some desert island, a weird conundrum cast off like an old childhood toy. This is the problem at a distance. And then obviously what we're trying to do is get closer to it and figure out what's going on. When this problem does find coverage, it is generally treated in circles like, psychology, spirituality, personal growth, some self-help help books, some stuff related to the New Age. But, most of these approaches, in my opinion, from what I know, they're not going the full mile by connecting these dots. And that's because the consciousness piece, what I'm talking about here, that goes ignored. On the emotional level, okay. On the soul level, even perhaps, depending on where you're going for your spiritual guidance. But the adult versions of ourselves on this consciousness level tend to forget that the childhood paradigm, through that seed at the beginning of inspiration, is a total consciousness, not an arbitrary part of it. And remembering all these topics about dreams and about games and the possibility there, the child state can't be sublimated to something beneath or inferior to the adult one. It just doesn't make sense. All we have is that it is another state. That's really what I was touching on a little bit earlier about consciousness states. They don't really stack. You have different ones, but just like with dreams, you can't say which is the dream that's more real, the life is more real, the dream is less real. You can't really do that from a philosophical point of view. Of course, that is a whole other topic that we are just touching on. Where does this first consciousness go as we age? Sure, people don't really talk about this, but that doesn't make it all go away. On the contrary, it's very much alive. We are forced to follow the herd's pattern, or at least encouraged, I should say. With no one talking about this and no one offering a guide, we perform a maneuver that is both individual and specific to us, and then mirrored in the general actions of our teachers, acquaintances, and friends. Like the train tracks, everybody makes this switch at the same time while saying nothing about it. A train goes on tracks. It has a direction and great momentum. It's hard to slow down or move. That's inertia, of course. As all of our tracks interesting things happen. We reorganize ourselves into the adult consciousness, which is both new and a transfiguration, like tiny little pieces sort of reorganizing on the other side, bits of light, bits of consciousness, us. There's one more metaphor on this that I think is really helpful. Think of a dinner party. cocktails, a celebration about something, people having a good time, people enjoying themselves, you know, saying hi, smiling, taking their places, all dressed up. You know, imagine being in a setting like that. Maybe it's outdoors, sound of crickets, lovely weather, flowers on the tables, some nice wine. You can just hear the bubbles coming off the champagne, something like that. A reunion of sorts, talking and dancing, yet at some point, you know, as you're kind of in this outdoor garden party, this reunion, whatever it is, having such a nice time, there's this feeling nagging at you from the back. We've known each other before. Here you are, bigger, grown-up versions of yourselves. A lot of things seem the same, and yet you're all playing different parts. Almost like you were all handed out different scripts and now performing those different roles. You can go on laughing and talking and having a nice time, but there is a feeling in the background of all this that you're no longer fully in control, that something about this whole situation is much more determined by outside forces or social forces, because there's now an order in place, slow and steady like a hum. You're dancing to a different beat, like the one played by the band, for example. This general kind of process is one way to understand the adult world, and in particular, I mean this transition, jumping over the divide, like the guy jumping over the cliffs with the clouds behind him. That transition to the adult world from the childhood one. As we continue to understand this, we're going to see the strange way in which one world has been almost picked up and lifted to a different place. Consciousness-wise, people are trying to apply the same rules that they did before when they were younger, you know, to a whole different ball game. One thing is clear, we're not in Kansas anymore.